Hey guys, it's Yuta, and here's my take on Naomi Osaka's Japaneseness. First, who's Naomi Osaka? Well, she's a professional tennis player who recently won the US Open. Her mother is Japanese and her father is Haitian. She was born in Japan, and when she was 3, she went to the United States and she has lived in the US since then. So she has both Japanese and American nationalities, and she plays tennis as Japanese. Now, her victory is a huge deal in Japan because she's the first Japanese person to win such a prominent tournament. So the Japanese media talks about her every single day. It's been a few weeks already, but they're still talking about her. And it seems to me, generally speaking, Japanese people just consider her Japanese. But of course, people have different opinions. And there's also many non-Japanese people who have very strong opinions about whether she is Japanese or not. And I find the topic of identity and ethnicity very, very interesting, so I'm going to discuss this in this video. But the thing is, defining what it means to be Japanese is not straightforward. So let's discuss it from different perspectives. So nationality is simple. Either you have it or you don't. And Naomi has a Japanese nationality as well as American nationality, so she's obviously qualified as a Japanese national. And you might have heard of this, but technically, if you are Japanese, you're not allowed to have multiple nationalities. But you don't have to choose until you become 22. And Naomi is not 22 yet, so she's allowed to keep both nationalities. Actually, this law isn't really enforced, so many people just end up keeping multiple nationalities. But with public figures, people can be a little more strict, so maybe Naomi has to choose one before she becomes 22. But when people talk about Naomi's Japaneseness, they're not necessarily talking about her nationality. So let's talk about other aspects. So ethnicity can be pretty tricky because there's no single definition that everybody can agree with. But I think most people think about physical traits and heritage. And from this perspective, Naomi can be described as half Japanese and half Haitian. And I think most people will be happy with this definition. But when it comes to her physical traits, I think many people will have different opinions because it can be very subjective. For example, some people say she looks more black than Asian, and other people might say the opposite. But to me personally, actually when I see her, I just see a Japanese face. Well, it's probably because I'm used to seeing all kinds of faces, Asian, black, and mixed, so I probably noticed subtle physical traits. Or it's probably because I'm Japanese, I tend to notice Japanese traits in other people. But physically speaking, to me, she looks pretty Japanese to me. Now, language is a very interesting element, because if you talk to people who don't think Naomi is Japanese, many people will mention her Japanese ability, because her Japanese isn't fully developed. Now, I used a very nuanced expression, not fully developed, because she actually speaks Japanese and she understands a lot. Of course, Naomi's Japanese isn't as good as somebody who grew up in Japan speaking Japanese. But I think people underestimate her Japanese ability. For example, if you watch her interviews on Japanese TV in Japanese, you can see she actually understands most questions in Japanese and she answers directly to the questions in English because she can express herself better in English. But that doesn't mean she doesn't speak Japanese, because she does. And Naomi's Japanese sounds exactly like a Japanese person who grew up overseas. But having said that, I don't think speaking Japanese fluently is absolutely necessary to be considered Japanese. And I'm thinking of Japanese people who grew up overseas. Even if both of your parents are Japanese, if you grew up somewhere else, it's possible that you end up not speaking Japanese. But I think they are still considered Japanese. And you may disagree with my position, but it will just mean that it's just a semantic difference of what defines ethnicity. And there's also a question of identity, but I think it's totally up to her. If she feels like she's Japanese, her identity will be Japanese. If she feels like she's Haitian, her identity will be Haitian. And if she thinks she's both, she can be both, because you can have multiple identities. And I remember that she said she doesn't feel like she's American. And if she feels that way, maybe her identity isn't American. And let's talk about mannerism and personality traits because many people bring up this point. People who emphasize that she's Japanese tend to bring up the point that her behavior and her personality are Japanese. And I can totally understand that. If you remember what she said after winning the US Open, she said something like she was sorry because everybody was cheering for Serena. And this kind of humility is certainly associated with being Japanese. And she's rather a shy person, and again, that's something you'd expect from a Japanese person. And it's true that her kind of behavior and personality would do pretty well in Japan. However, I actually disagree with the position that her mannerism and personality traits are what make her Japanese. Just think about it. In order to be considered Japanese, you are expected to behave a certain way and you are expected to have certain personality traits. That sounds too conformist to me. I prefer the kind of society where you can just be yourself and it's okay to be different from everybody else. So yes, it's true, I can relate to her the way she is as a Japanese person, but I would have to say that that's not something you're required to have to be considered Japanese. So what does it really mean when people say Naomi is Japanese or she's not? I think it comes down to the question of belonging. It's about recognizing her as a member of the same group as other Japanese people. And it can be super subjective. I suspect that some people maybe decide whether she's Japanese or not based on whether they like her or not. Very subjective. So let me tell you how I feel subjectively. When I see her on TV, I just see a Japanese person. Of course, she can also be Haitian or American, but I have to say I relate to her on a sort of Japanese level. Maybe it helps that I know many English-speaking Japanese people and I also understand everything that she says. But it seems like many young Japanese people kind of feel the same way. But that's just my very subjective reaction, so I'll explain the reasons. First of all, one of her parents is Japanese, and to me, that's enough to make her Japanese. And by the way, in Japan, if you have at least one parent who is Japanese, you are entitled to be a Japanese national. So Japan as a country seems to think the same way. But on top of that, she was also born in Japan and she stayed there until she was 3. That makes her even more Japanese. And I said language isn't necessarily a requirement, but she speaks Japanese and she's always been in touch with her Japanese side. And she's working really hard to fulfill the role of a Japanese player. After winning the US Open, she came back to Japan and she's on TV every single day. She's really working hard. So, based on those reasons, I would say that she's Japanese. And of course, she can have other identities like Haitian or American. But before I go, there's something I really want to emphasize. Regardless of her nationality and ethnicity, I think she deserves a lot of respect as a person because she achieved something remarkable and she really worked hard to be where she is. I feel a little bit contradictory saying this after making this video, but let's just not focus too much on her Japaneseness. And I personally enjoy watching her on TV. I watched her on the Ellen show and she's such a likable and relatable person. So in the end, I feel really happy that she won and I will continue supporting her. By the way, yes, it's true that I said that speaking Japanese isn't always required. It's also true that many Japanese people care a lot about the language. And whenever Naomi speaks Japanese, people are very happy. So, if you're interested in coming to Japan and interact with Japanese people, I think you need to be able to speak Japanese. And if you want to learn Japanese with me, I can send you some free Japanese lessons by email. So click the link and subscribe to my email group, Japanese with Yuta. Alright, see you guys soon. Ciao, ciao.